Hello, Mandibil here. Welcome to part 3 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's book called The Art of the Argument. And the last time I went over the chapter called there was a first introduction, almost an hour long recapture of what went on in the first part. It's not because there was so little left to do of the book in the second part. There's not much to recapture or sort of deconstruct after the part 2. So the only thing I'm going to say is that there's a very short chapter on correlation and causation, and I was kind of confused when on the next page that there's basically there's no discussion on what it means by correlation and causation, and that correlation does not equal causation, and so on. And it's like it's floating in air. I was expecting a further explanation of what he's talking about, correlation and causation, and how that relates to previous chapters in the book. But he went into the difference between logical and true. So I guess that's what we are going to deal with now. Okay, the difference between logical and true. An argument may be logical, the conclusion follows from the premises, but still be false if the premises are wrong. If I say, well, I love it, right? I love it. Because what it points out is the way he argues syllogistically in his ethics is completely wrong, right? It doesn't work because there are no premises that are neither false or true. They are simply incorrect premise statements. And I recently made a little video called, I think I called it Stefan Molyneux explain how he is wrong about his. I'm sorry, I forgot the title. It's quite new, so give me a little second here and I'll find it for you. And the title of the video is Stefan Molyneux shows that his ethics is flawed, right? And this little bit here is actually a nice addition that I could have, I hadn't reached this part of the book, so I didn't use that in my little video that proves that, where Stefan Molyneux basically himself proved that his ethics doesn't work. And this is just more, fuel to the fire, right? Okay, so if he says, 1, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, then the structure remains logically sound. The conclusion does follow from the premises in that all instances represented by a category must share the characteristics of that category. In this case, the immortality of men, but the conclusion is false because premise 1 is false. Oh, I misread. Okay, I misread. I'm sorry. I'm taking this one again. I'm sorry. I didn't notice it. All men are immortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. Okay. In this case, the immortality of men, but the conclusion is false because premise 1 is false. And that's correct, according to deductive logic. Debates often go seriously wrong because the participants tussle about the conclusion without examining the premises and the argument. I have for many years repeatedly stated that philosophy is a process. The conclusion is largely irrelevant. A factory is a process that produces a product. A car factory produces a car. An argument is a process that produces a conclusion. The conclusion is not the process, just as a car is not the factory. All right. The conclusion is irrelevant to the process because the conclusion is a passive product of the process. If you design a factory to produce a car, the factory will produce a car. Hopefully. The factory is the active process. The car is the passive result. In the same way, reason and evidence are the active process. The conclusion is the passive result. I have a sense that this might be a bit simplistic, right? But I'm not sure. I'm going to take it as I'm not too much into syllogism. I just understand how they work. Okay, so I actually think that syllogisms are quite problematic as a use of anything, because a generalized claim of knowledge is not knowledge, in my opinion. All men are immortal. It's just a claim. It's just a hypothesis, right? Who has met all men in the world, right? And also what defines a man, and what defines immortality? Is immortality an attribute of a person? I can observe immortality, right? It's a sort of prediction about the future. How the hell can I know about the future? It cannot be knowledge, right? So there are lots of problems with these syllogisms. But that doesn't mean that if someone is using a syllogism, they can just use it however they want. They have to follow the structure of how syllogisms are used and established, and on the conclusions you can draw from them, right? Supplied, of course, that the premises are correct. And that's sort of what he deals with here. And that it's fine for me. The production of cars is the purpose of the car factory. Indeed, it is the entire point of the car factory. In the same way, the conclusion is the purpose of the argument. If the factory is supposed to produce a car, but instead produces a boat, the process of the factory production needs to be examined and changed. There is little point in criticizing the boat for not being a car. Pretending that the boat is somehow a car, fix the process, don't merely debate the outcome. I would agree, I think. The car factory produces cars for the purpose of profit, which requires the happiness of consumers. The argument produces truth for the purpose. No. No, the argument doesn't produce truth. Truth is a part of the establishment of the premises, right? The premises have to be true. They must be based on knowledge. And that combination of these statements and their knowledge resolves in a conclusion. But the conclusion is not truth, right? That's a part of the premises. You don't even understand this, right? It's like saying 1 apple plus 1 apple equals 2 apples, right? But there's no 2 apples. There's apple, and you add the 1 and you make it into 2 apples. There's no 2 apples that are true anywhere, right? Just like Socrates is immortal is a conclusion. It's not a truth, right? It's a conclusion. You don't know that he's immortal. You have just deduced it from the premises, right? I mean, it's this truth thing and this knowledge thing that seems to be a huge hurdle for many philosophers and people in general. It seems so hard to distinguish when something can be true, when it can be knowledge, and so on. And then they just throw everything into a more or less, to some degree, right, into syllogisms, and think they are arriving at truth, right? Truth is based on empiricism, not deductions, right? Deductions are technical things. They are logical leaps of some kind, right? You don't know that Socrates is mortal, right? It's not knowledge, it's a deduction, right? In fact, I would see it's an inference into the future that you're saying that this guy is going to die in some unknown number of years, right? So, but how do you know? But you're not knowing it. You are hypothesizing about it, right? You don't know that he's dying. You only know it, even if it feels like it must be certain that he dies. You do not know it before you experience it. Otherwise, it's not empiricism, right? And exactly because empiricism is a foundation for the premises, it can't be empiric when you make a deduction then, right? That's why you need the deduction, because you do not have the the empiricist, you don't have the sense data, right? Otherwise, you would say Socrates is immortal and just quit the deduction. Okay. The argument is like a statue. All these examples. The conclusions are merely the shadow cast by the statue. There is no point trying to shift the shadow without moving the statue. The conclusion is the juiciest part of the argument, philosophy's money shot, so to speak, which is why everyone wants to wrangle about the conclusion. But anyone who jumps in the deep end in this way should be disqualified from debating. Now we move to the second, and generally more common and useful form of reasoning called inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning attempts to draw general rules from specific instances. It requires observation first and cannot be reasoned from first principles. Okay, it would be nice to show what first principles you have been using so far. It deals more with probability than certainty. All right. These two methodologies are not entirely distinct. Think of them as two overlapping circles. There are certainties unrelated to probabilities. There are certainties unrelated to probabilities. Gravity. I must admit, I don't understand this. There are certainties unrelated to probabilities. So are probabilities, gravity, a kind of probability, or is gravity a certainty? Because he hasn't defined what a certainty is, right? So we don't know what he means by certainty. I don't know. My opinion is certainty is impossible, and I would be glad to explain why. But what does he mean by certainty? And gravity, it's just, okay, is that an example of a probability or certainty? Or I don't know. It must be the certainty. He must be thinking that gravity is certain, but I can't experience gravity, right? I might experience some force pushing on me, or watch a rock move down a mountain or something, but that's a rock moving down a mountain. That's not gravity, right? Gravity isn't an explanation. There are probabilities too. There are probabilities unrelated to certainties, genetics, or weather. There are probabilities unrelated to certainties. Why do you treat your readers like this? So this is what is fucking annoying with Stefan Molyneux, right? He can go on a lot of examples and explain something with the boat and the factory. That was pretty good, actually. That's a good analogy for what he's doing. That was great, in my opinion. And then this comes, right? Oh, it has to be deconstructed to have even a chance of understanding what he's saying, right? There are probabilities. Is being, does it exist? Can I look at a probability somewhere? No, not to as far as I understand, right? My education within natural sciences does not show any way to put probability under a microscope or anything like that, right? Unrelated to certainties, genetics and weather. Okay, so the probability that you are going to get the same hair color as your mother has certain probability, or the weather, it's 58% certain that it will be raining tomorrow or something like that. Okay, but that's not exactly probabilities, but maybe you can make some model for calculating probabilities. Okay, I'll let it pass. There are certainties related to probabilities. I will certainly drown. No, I will certainly die if I drown. And I'm more likely to drown if I swim too far. Okay, yeah, I guess. There are probabilities related to certainties. I should probably bring an umbrella, even though I'm not absolutely certain it will rain. I mean, I have a sense that there's something he's trying to say, but it's so convoluted and compressed that I can't follow. My mind cannot follow what he's trying to say, right? This is annoying. This is quite annoying. Maybe there's something very important about inductive reasoning there, right? Maybe it's not that important because I have an idea what inductive reasoning is, so I'm possibly going to understand in the end what he's trying to say. But let's see. To start thinking about inductive reasoning, imagine I'm describing the properties of another world, planet Bob, and I tell you that it often rains when the bubble dingles are swollen. Would you know this to be true or false? Even you tell that bubble dingles are a kind of plant, does that definition help you determine the truth or falsehood of my assertion? Imagine I'm describing the properties of another world, planet Bob, and I tell you that it often rains when the bubble dingles are swollen. Okay, if I'm not experiencing planet Bob, or these bubble dingles, or the rain from them, I have to say that I don't know, right? I can't say it's false because I'm not experiencing it, right? And I can't say it's true because I'm not experiencing it. If it's raining, it would be true. If it's not raining, it would be false. But I have not access to bubble dingles just because you stated to me. And often is an interpretation. Often is not something that can be true, right? It's sort of statistics or something like that, right? So if you can add the term often to a specific statistics from a certain definition of what often means, then you can possibly make a description of often regarding rain on planet Bob. But it's I don't know to me, right? It's I don't know. Even if I tell you that bubblings I did so. Of course not. Would you know this to be true or false? And he says, of course not. Okay. Now, if I tell you that the gravity is a property of matter and planet Bob is composed of matter, would you know for certain that gravity existed in this world? No, I wouldn't, because gravity is not something that exists, right? Gravity is an interpretation of what is going on when, matter behaves in the space, right? But you don't experience gravity. Gravity doesn't exist, right? The things that moves around because of gravity exist, right? And from the way they move around, you interpret that in a certain way, gravitational, whatever it's called, physics, right? Astrophysics. And then you create a formula or a description of that, and you label it as gravity. That means you do not experience gravity. That means gravity doesn't exist. So the answer is not, of course you wouldn't. No, I would say, of course, I can. It's nonsense, right? It's bad argument. The second statement is an example of deductive reasoning. Gravity is a property of matter. No, it isn't. No, it's not a property of matter. It's incorrect. It's stupid, right? You don't know what you're talking about. Planet Bob is composed of matter. Okay, how do you know? I don't know. Just because you know doesn't mean that I know, right? Therefore, planet Bob has the property of gravity. No, a planet doesn't have the property of gravity, right? It's not a property, right? It's not a property of a planet. On the other hand, you can't tell anything about the probability of rain when the plant bubble dingles is swollen. How would you determine the truth or falsehood of my assertion that it often rains when the bubble dingles are swollen? Annoying. Bubble dingles. You would have to suit up, fly through space until you got to planet Bob to find some bubble ding and start your observation. There's no other direct way to verify or predict what I've said. That's correct. You can verify it, but when you leave the planet, you still don't know, right? It might have stopped raining from the point when you left, right? You're just saying, okay, because I've experienced it over this period of time, I'm going to foresee or predict that it's going to be the case in the future. But that you predict something in the future doesn't mean that you know the future, right? Do you see the difference? I think I do, but you are greatly wrong about something, a few things about your arguments here. To help us remember why there are two kinds of reasoning, think of the difference between predator and prey. A predator must be absolute in its reasoning. The lion must correctly identify and stalk the zebra, must calculate speed and interception without error, must attack and bite accurately, and must persist until the prey is down. All this must serve the conclusion, the meal. However, prey has a different set of calculations because a predator can see the prey, but the prey usually cannot see the predator, at least until it's too late. A zebra grazing in the tall grass must be constantly alert to signs of a predator. However, most signs should be disregarded for the simple reason that if a zebra sprints off every time the grass moves, it will quickly run out of energy, be more visible because it moves, and to be too tired to run if there's a real predator. Thus, the zebra must be alert to its surroundings, accumulating evidence of potential predation, but must not constantly waste energy fleeing without probable cause. The lion calculates absolutes while the zebra calculates probabilities. This is the difference between, that's an interesting comparison, I think. I hadn't thought of it that way, but interesting. This is the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. In a very real sense, deductive reasoning is empirical, while inductive reasoning is mathematical. Deductive reasoning is absolute. Inductive reasoning analyzes trends. This is not to say that either one is more important than the other. If the lion is wrong, it does not eat. If the zebra is wrong, it gets eaten. If you have ever hunted, you know that you possess far more knowledge than your prey. You train your gun sight on a deer as it blissfully eats. If you make a sudden noise, the deer will look up quickly, but then you hold still, hoping to lull it back into a false sense of security. You are dealing in absolutes, the deer, the gun, the kill, while the deer is dealing with probabilities. What are the odds that the sound is a predator or just a rabbit or the wind or tree branch creaking? The deer can't run every time it hears a sudden sound, but it must stay alert. Deductive reasoning goes from the general to the specific. Socrates is mortal, because that is what predators do. If you were to program a lion with syllogism, it might come out something like this. 1, I'm hungry. 2, my hunger is satisfied with meat. 3, all zebras are made of meat. 4, the slowest zebras are the easiest to catch. 5, I will stalk and chase the slowest zebra. 6, the zebra is the slowest zebra. I will stalk and chase this one. You see how it works? The lion is going from the general to the specific. From all zebras to one particular zebra that satisfies the criterion for appeasing the lion's hunger. In the example above, using Socrates and mortality, we go from the mortality of all men to the particular mortality of one individual, just as the lion goes from the potential tastiness of all zebras to the particular taste of the zebra he killed. Remember, well, it's probably a she, but okay, never mind. Remember, the exchange is not entirely black and white. Some probability processing occurs in the mind of the lion, just as some absolutist reasoning occurs in the mind of the zebra. These are general trends that can help you remember the difference between the two ways of approaching data. Okay, I think he spends too much time on developing the analogy than presenting the real use of inductive reasoning. Okay, maybe it comes later. Inductive versus deductive, reactionary versus proactive. Another admittedly broad generalization regarding the two types of reasoning is the difference between proactive and reactive behaviors. The lion stalking the zebra is engaged in proactive behavior, and thus by initiating the encounter, it is in far greater control of the variables. You initiate behavior in order to achieve some goal, and you must believe there is a reasonable chance of achieving that goal in order to justify the initial behavior. You might respond that many people play the lottery, but very few people win. But the point of buying a lottery ticket is the excitement and hope. The man who buys a lottery ticket is almost 100% sure he can achieve his goal, not of winning the lottery, but of buying the ticket. Initiating action requires the certainty of deductive reasoning, and control over variables increases that certainty. The zebra initiates action by eating grass, of course, but there is little chance the grass is going to escape. On the other hand, what happens when you try to decide whether to carry an umbrella on a walk? When you look at the sky and check the weather, you are being reactive. In the same way, the zebra is constantly scanning its surroundings for evidence of imminent predation, like a feminist at a frat party. Okay. If a lion leaps at the zebra will run, which is reactive, not proactive. Since deductive reasoning deals more with absolutes and inductive reasoning deals more with probabilities, inductive reasoning is more focused on how you will react to certain events. If you don't want to get wet on your walk and it is currently raining, you will take an umbrella. You don't need to weigh probabilities because the event you are trying to decide about is already upon you. A cautious deer has not yet run from the hunter, but after the first gunshot, it flees because the event is already upon it. The pursuit of the lion is the initiation action. The flight of the zebra is the reaction. This is why I talk about deductive reasoning being predatory or alpha, while inductive reasoning and prey-based or beta. Dominant life form revel in absolutes and fight hard against the encroaching fumes of rank relative. There it is again, the rank. It smells of relativism, the fumes and rank. And it's sort of a decent explanation of philosophical dissertations here, right? And then there comes this need for emotional manipulation, right? I sense it immediately, right? He wants to manipulate you into having, us versus them, or anything like that, right? And whatever it is, but for sure it's sophistry and emotional manipulation. It just can't help it, right? It is as if he thinks that doing philosophy is not enough to engage you. It's almost like, yeah, I need to do these, logical steps and, explanation and exposition of inductive and deductive reasoning. But the nail on the head is my, my emotional manipulation and my sophistry, right? That's what pushes it into your brain or something like that, right? So in a way, you could say that it's a sign that he doesn't believe too much in the efficacy of the philosophy, but that it has to be garnered or spiced up with a bit of sophistry and emotional manipulation to really get you to digest it, right? In fact, it has the opposite effect on me, right? I get my arms up immediately, right? I get turned off by such statements, right? Dominant life forms revel in absolutes and fight hard against the encroaching fumes of rank relativism. Look at that kind of lingo, right? It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Even if there's some correctness to it or some, truth quote to it, it's disgusting. It has nothing to do in a philosophical dissertation. Then he will probably say, no, but this is not real philosophy. This is kind of a everyday mainstream philosophy, coined towards these kind of people who don't understand the deep philosophy, but something sophistry like that, right? And if some of those people will come and say, I don't understand this part over here, then he will say, no, that's because you don't understand philosophy, because I'm the great philosopher in the sky who knows everything about philosophy. You're just too stupid. So depending on what camp you're in, he will sort of say, I'm in the other camp, right? Okay, absolutism and society. Parasitical or dependent people often fear and hate absolutes, since they are always weighing costs, benefits, and probabilities. Their parasitism can be destroyed by absolutes, particularly moral absolutes. So why are you talking about moral absolutes when we are dealing with deductive and inductive reasoning? Because that's a different kind of reasoning. Are you jumping over to moral statements now, right? Okay, this is the kind of all over the place aspect of this writing. Think of an abusive woman and her beaten down husband. She is the predator, he is the prey. She initiates, he reacts. She twists values to damn him and excuse herself. Those who feed him spine-stiffening absolutes are her natural foes, since they help him to stand up to her abuse and free himself from her manipulations. She feeds him doubt. He is freed by absolutes. Assertiveness is the animal kingdom. Generally means killing and eating, which is not the case at all in a civilized human society. The establishment and promulgation of rational absolute is the very definition of civilization, no matter how scary it may feel to be bipedal and dependent relativist. Okay, I understand what he's saying, and it's not. It's fine, right? But killing and eating, it's not the case at all in civilized human society. No, but that is only because human beings know that they can die. So they readily hand over their stuff to people coming to them and say, I'm going to kill you if you don't give me your stuff, right? That is what called civilized. It's not really very civilized because it's an implicit threat of murder, in my opinion, right? And this is why there's so many troubles in society, because this undercurrent of the threat of murder is always there in your sort of deep down in your subconscious, maybe you could say, right? And that's why when you start to discuss things that starts to appeal at this implicit state threat of murder if you don't comply, people are up in arms and say, "Oh, you have to pay your taxes," and they get mad, right? Because that's the part of them they have no control over, and they have submitted themselves into obeying, right? At a rate, I'm carrying on. At a rate that has been conservatively, I think I missed something of it. The establishment and promulgation of rational absolute is the very definition of civilization, no matter how scary it may feel to bipedal dependent relativists. At a rate that has been conservatively clocked at about 10 million instances per minute, at least on the internet, the following interaction occurs. 1. A generalization is made, inductive reasoning. A specific example is produced rebutting the generalization, deductive response. The generalization is believed to be rebutted. For instance, when I cite scientific studies detailing a particular tendency among women, the inevitable pushback is that not all women are like that. This is such a common response that has even coined its own word, the acronym NAWALT. Strawmanning a tendency as an absolute is idiotic. Okay. It's idiotic. That's a great, great argument. I'm being sarcastic, right? But let me see how much further we go here. Inductive reasoning and probability. Inductive reasoning moves from general observations to specific probabilities rather than from general rules to specific instances. Inductive reasoning takes a gathered set of general observations and attempts to apply a rational theory to explain them. For instance, people tend to carry more umbrellas on a cloudy day than on sunny days. Since clouds do not directly compel people to carry umbrellas, it must be a preconceived idea that causes such behavior. In this case, the idea that it cannot rain on a sunny day. Now, if you tell someone that you notice that more people carry umbrellas on a cloudy day, and he replies that he never carries an umbrella, he is simply removing himself from the realm of rational argument and revealing himself to be either an idiot or ridiculously over-emotional. Two sides of the same coin. Heave a sigh, give him some edible glue, and move on. What? What is this? Hang on a second. Now we get into this, what would that be called in English? Word equilibrism? Word juggling, right? He likes this kind of sophist word manipulation, kind of, which is off-putting to me, right? Maybe he thinks he gets absolutely convinced that he gets a satisfaction out of putting words together so they sound great together in sort of a but it's an author. It's someone who likes words, manipulating words, even and caring less about whether or not how it's received and what context they're used in. This is a philosophical book, right? In any way you want to turn it, right? Even if you would say it is possibly a light-hearted mainstream philosophy, something, I don't know, but it's a philosophical subject for certain, right? And I think it's out of place to use funny language like this, right? He says, now, if you tell someone that you notice that more people carry umbrellas on cloudy days, and he replies that he never carries an umbrella, he's simply removing himself from the realm of rational argument and revealing himself to be either an idiot or ridiculously over-emotional, two sides of the same coin. Heave a sigh, give him some edible glue, and move on. Edible glue? What is that? Move on? Maybe he didn't hear what you said, and I know it, but why are you telling someone? Are you going over to someone over? I have to tell them, okay, I have noticed that more people carry umbrellas on cloudy days. And just because the person over there is not engaging in your debate, you're saying, I'll give you some edible glue. It's a weird kind of manipulative argumentation tactics, right? Okay, and it doesn't really enlighten what he's trying to say. It's covered in all this word salad, right? So what he's trying to say, in my opinion, is that he asks in East and the other one answers in West, and there's no. It's sort of a fallacious answer to whatever proposition this guy or statement Stefan Molyneux is making, and it's maybe an attempt at making a red herring or such, right? So that it's sort of derail the discussion, and that's just a common fallacy. So it's not really a part of inductive reasoning or probability that somebody is doing it wrongly, right? From definition to instance, while the inductive reasoning moves from instance to generalities. The root of deductive reasoning is inductive reasoning. The root of deductive reasoning is inductive reasoning. As children, we come to understand the definition of chair through repeated exposure to chairs. We understand that the sun warms our face because that's what it does repeatedly. We use inductive reasoning to develop abstract models derived from sensory data in order to extrapolate immediate experience into general principles. Now it goes into some metaphysics / epistemology. I'm not too keen on this kind of sort of dropping little bits of epistemology and metaphysics here and there. I would prefer that was sort of generalized or stated in the early parts of the book, so we know what he means when he says certain things. That's just my way of. This is a more lighthearted type of a book, I guess. So, but it would be nice if he had made a book stating, this is my metaphysics, this is my epistemology, this is my how I deal with objectivity, and he has made his ethics, but that sucks like a vacuum, and I have commented on it recently, and so on, right? So, but metaphysics and epistemology and objectivity, in my opinion, you could go there and see what does he mean by the various terms, and then you would use the same terms within this book, so we knew that it was. In fact, I made a search in UPB, and I couldn't find any. Maybe I did a wrong search, I don't know, but searching the Kindle version of UPB, there was no mention of value argument. No, nothing. He says that two different kinds of arguments. There are truth arguments, there are value arguments. But in his ethics, albeit it's 15 years old, right? But still, there's no mention of value arguments. So now he calls it value arguments. Why? Why doesn't he call it something that he called it in the book called ethics, right? So it's just these little things that make things more coherent, and you don't lose sight of what is. And one thing you have to deduce or conclude from the way he does it or argue is that he's actually aware that he's using different terms at different times, and that is manipulating you somehow, right? Otherwise, he just doesn't care about it, right? And he thinks that every term he uses is sort of well-defined and everything understands what he means. And that's not the case. Okay. We use inductive reasoning to develop abstract models derived from sensory data in order to extrapolate immediate experience into general principles. I'm not too sure on that one. That sounds like a big one. I will make a note. There is another category called abductive reasoning that draws a tentative hypothesis from disparate data, but which is related to some sort of testable hypothesis rather than the reaching of a specific conclusion. Okay, I must admit, I haven't heard about that one before. Maybe I've heard about it, but I left it on the roadside, right, on the wayside. Examples of inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning draws tentative conclusion from observable patterns, such as conclusion is called a conjecture. Strong conjectures come about when two criteria are met. Significant data is collected, causality is established. Okay. So significant, right? It's very relative, all this, right? What is significant, right? And then another thing is causality is not something that you can establish. Well, you can. Well, it's an old problem, right? And Hume is a big one here also, right? Where he challenges as an empiricist, you need to look at how you get insights, right? So, okay, let us suppose you get off a plane in Beijing for the first time in your life, and the first thing you see is a man blowing his nose into a garbage can. Okay. Interesting examples. Would you be justified in texting your friends that everyone in China blows their noses into garbage cans? No, because you have not collected enough data. I'm looking forward to understanding what enough entails. Okay, let's see. In general, anyone who claims that an absolute can result from inductive reasoning is wrong. Yes, I would agree with that. You may arrive at absolutes from deductive reasonings, but rarely, if ever, from inductive reasoning. I would say never, because it's not something that it can do. It can only, as he says, make it probable, possible, probable, and so on, right? Let's say you get a new neighbor who tells you she has 20 cats. In her backyard, you see 19 black cats with white paws roaming around. If you had to guess, what color would you predict the unseen 20th cat is? green. You have enough data to create a conjecture that the missing cat is also black with white paws, as 95% of our cats, the ones you can see, demonstrate 100% color conformity. And there's nothing about some objects over here that necessitate that some object you haven't seen over here must be in a certain way. I think this is a bad argument, right? Of course, you cannot prove this for certain, but the conjecture is reasonable. It's reasonable. Yeah, okay, right? Okay. If $1 million went to the person who correctly guessed the color of the 20th cat, what would you say? I'd probably say it's the same as the others. Not only do you have enough data, but you can also create reasonable theories regarding causality. Yeah, this is one of the problems with inductive reasoning, right? It's sort of, okay, there are 20 cats now. Okay, so I think I know what the 19th cat, and then I know what the 20th cat. But what if there was 11 cats, right? What if it was 2 cats? And then you say, yeah, but then it's a gradually less and less probable, and so on, right? Yeah, but it's subjective, right? It's subjective. The inductive reasoning, in my opinion, can never reach objectivity, right? It's always some kind of, I think this is good enough, while another person beside me might think that it's not good enough, depending on their rationalizations, right? So this is dangerous grounds in a way, right? Here are some casual explanations that spring to mind. Your neighbor has a fetish for black cats with white paws. Whoever provides her cats a fetish for black cats with white paws. If her cats breed and do not produce black kittens with white paws, she gives them away. The color pattern is highly transmittable genetically. If you have causality and enough data, and what is enough, right? It's like, yeah, you're using these terms as if it's understood what enough is. Do you have causality? Your conjecture becomes very strong. This is so fluffy, right? I know people that use induction, inductive reasoning all the time. We rarely use deductive reasoning, right? We use inductive reasoning in our everyday because inductive predicts the future. It's an attempt at predicting the future, right? The future is you do not know what the 20th cat looks like, but you are trying to make a judgment from the surroundings and all sorts of indications and evidence and whatever you want to call it that gives you some chance of making a qualified guess, right? But induction is never anything but a qualified guess. And the qualification depends on, you could say, the amount of data, but also your ability to understand the data and all sorts of weird situations, right? And some of it is not also based on rationality, whether or not you want to do the reasoning, right? So it's a complex situation, this, right? Let's say that all the polar bears you see hunting in the snow have white fur. You have some data, all visible have white fur, and you can create conjectures regarding causality. Bears with white fur are harder to see against the snow. This allows them to surprise and kill more prey, making them more likely to survive and reproduce. When you have clear causality and significant data, your conjecture becomes very strong, but it is still enormously difficult to come up with any absolutes through inductive reasoning alone. Let us say that you have always lived on a beach in Jamaica. You have never seen a polar bear frolicking in the surf. Does this mean it is impossible? Perhaps a passing zoo ship lost a polar bear overboard and someone's pet polar bear got loose. There are many improbable ways a polar bear might end up frolicking on a beach in Jamaica. Thus, you cannot say that it is impossible to find a polar bear frolicking on the beach in Jamaica. However, you can say that polar bears are not native to Jamaica. Yeah, you can say it, but how do you know? Have you been there? You have heard that there are not polar bears. So you're making it's conjecture upon conjecture upon conjecture upon conjecture, right? Yes, I know it's inductive, but it's very hard to sit down and discuss inductive reasoning because it's so dependent on so many things, and how you understand knowledge is very important, right? So philosophically, in my opinion, you can't give anybody else knowledge. So unless you're sitting down in Jamaica, looking at all of Jamaica, being able to, detect all of the animals and whatever is on Jamaica, you do not know the frolicking level of, polar bears in Jamaica, right? It's the same about the shape of Earth. That's why there's these flat earthers, right? Because nobody really knows what shape the Earth is, right? Only someone sitting in some spaceship out in orbit around the Earth who can actually vision or experience the shape of Earth. They can claim in that moment when they have their empiric experience of the shape of Earth, they can say, I know what shape the Earth has. When they get back to Earth, they can no longer say what shape Earth has because now they're in a position where they can't experience the shape of Earth. I know that most people will say, why would it have changed since I left orbit? But that's not the point of knowledge, right? That's where this inductive reasoning comes in, right? It's an extension of knowledge, but it's not knowledge. It's only an extension, right? And the one way to see it is that there are no flat mooners, right? Because everyone can go out at night and watch the moon and see what shape it has. Maybe if it's not full moon, it's hard to see the shape but right. So it's what do you mean when you mean shape? Okay, right, you could discuss that. But let's say it's full moon, you can go out and see the moon and say it's round. So you don't need to discuss it, right? You're inferring that, inducing that into the future when you do not experience the moon. Then you say, okay, I think the moon is still, I believe that the moon is still round, but you don't know that. It's just a matter of definition of what knowledge is. So then you are making inductions until you reach the point when you can experience the shape of the moon again and say the moon is round, right? But because it's fairly easy compared to seeing the shape of the Earth, what shape it has, right? It's fairly easy to establish the shape of the moon regularly and so on, right? While the shape of Earth is a completely different story, right? So therefore there are flat earthers because they challenge what it means to know something, right? You should appreciate that. In fact, I appreciate it very much. Okay, well, how far did we get? 1. Polar bears are native to cold climates. Jamaica is a hot climate, thus polar bears are not native to Jamaica. Yeah, it's all conjecture, right? Or more specifically, polar bears are native to cold climates. Jamaica is a hot climate, thus this polar bear is not native to Jamaica. No, but there's bad arguing because the polar bears do not have nativeness, right? You can't say a polar bear is native. How do you experience native, right? You look at a polar bear and say, okay, I can see native over there. It has some, look at this fur on below its tail. It has nativeness. No, it's all theories and, past experience of other people who have told you stories and so on, right? It's conjecture upon conjecture upon conjecture. Polar bears do not have nativeness. It's bad argument, right? What is a hot climate? You can't say, you can look at Jamaica and say, oh, so see, it has hot climate, right? And what is Jamaica? It's just a collection of rocks and trees and water, right? So these kind of arguments are very difficult to handle, right? They are so subjective and so conjecture and so theory, and that I know that if it's a polar bear You're not likely not going to find a polar bear out in the streets if you live in the middle of Europe or something like that, right? Or what it tends to be called Europe. I agree on that. But it's sort of a probability game, right? And it's purely up to yourself to make a judgment about it, right? I know that if you say that there are polar bears everywhere in Berlin, right? I can't challenge you on that claim. I would have to say, I don't know, right? I'm not in Berlin, and I can't look at all of Berlin at once. I have to be in a helicopter or something and look at the whole of Berlin, and right? And what would mean full of polar bears? Would there be 30 polar bears or 300 polar? It's just be very careful, be very critical, very skeptical about these kind of arguments. I can handle deductive arguments, right? But these inductive arguments are prone to manipulation, right? They are generally bullshit, most of them, I would say, right? Okay. The sweet joy of absolutes, deductive style. This is the value that deductive reasoning offers to the gathering of data. If you see a polar bear frolicking on the beach in Jamaica, you know for certain that it is not native to... I don't know that for certain. It's bullshit, right? I just explained. It's not something you know, right? Because you can't experience nativeness. It's a theory. It's a conjecture. Right? It's not even knowledge. So not to talk about certainty. No. Your certainty fetish is, going at 11 here, right? So you need to wind it down a bit. This can be very helpful and even life-saving. Knowing that the polar bear is not native to Jamaica might spur you to capture and relocate it to a cooler environment where it can survive. When you gather enough data and formulate a strong enough theory of causality, you can create... Where does causality come in? Maybe I've overlooked something. Where did causality arrive? Okay, I will have to make a note of this one and then think about it until next time. You can create a fairly bulletproof conjecture. Okay, fairly bulletproof is maybe okay. And I remind you that science is based on inductive reasoning, right? So, and when you read about science, you are actually not doing the inductive reasoning. You're just potentially trusting those who are presenting the science have done enough to claim what they claim they are claiming, right? So just be careful, right? And this kind of trust in inductive reasoning is something that is ugly violated by something like Dr. Fauci, who says, but it's science, right? You have to trust science, but it's all inductive reasoning, right? It's all this, subjective understanding. Now I think I know, and now I think I have causality, and now it's certain, and right? It's bullshit. Science is very, very difficult to do very well, and everything. We were talking vaccines, right? I mean, it's bullshit. Okay, that doesn't invalidate inductive reasoning as such, right? But it can be violated. However, the moment that the conjecture moves from probable to certain, but it can't. A conjecture can never be certain. What would be a certain conjecture? It's bullshit, right? Be very careful with certainty, because uncertainty is impossible, in my opinion. Maybe I'm going to take a stab at certainty in part what will be part 4, right? Your inductive reasoning to deductive certain is the moment you generally transition from inductive reasoning to deductive reasoning, from likely to absolute. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. You can make that jump. You can make from likely to absolute. No, but then it would be knowledge, right? And knowledge is not what you do when you make inductive reasoning, right? It is predicting knowledge, right? Predicting that this rock will fall this way, right? If I have this, I'm predicting, I'm making an inference or then inductive reasoning that if I let this go, it will move in this direction and stop when it hits this, right? How do I know that it hits the table? I don't. At this moment, I don't know that, right? No matter how I conjecture about it, I don't know it before it happens, because for the simple reason, and try to understand this, the simple reason is I do not have knowledge of it. I don't have what's the word? I'm a little tired. I don't have sense data. I don't have empirical data of it being on the table. So no matter how many times I do this, right? I did now it hits. Okay, now I'm up here. Okay, how do I know that it will be on the table if I let it go? I don't until now. Now I know it's on the table, right? Okay, now it's no longer on the table. I don't know that it's on the table now, right? I can do this a trillion, gazillion, bagillion, quintillion, fantasillion times, and I still don't know the thing is on the table before I experience it on the table. There is no possible certainty in induction. Okay? Read some Hume. To some degree, at least, the goal of human knowledge is to move as much information as possible from theory, conjecture to fact. The more we can be certain of, the less we have to think about it, the more that we can prove, and the less we have to prove. Okay, so this is a big one, right? Having knowledge. It doesn't mean that you can't predict that it will be on the table, right? I just predicted that it would be on the table, and it were when I had knowledge of it, right? It's fine. I'm going to predict that possibly every time I do this, I'm going to make the prediction that it'll be on the table. But the prediction is not knowledge, right? It's on the table now. That's knowledge, right? And when I make, physical laws, if I'm into that, right? Then I try to make a prediction of what is going on when I'm doing this, right? What do I do when I make a physical law that explains this, right? But I have to do this. I have to do this first before I can make a law about it, right? So I have to observe it and have an idea, see it again and again and again. I think, okay, there seems to be a pattern here. Okay, I'm taking this pattern and I'm generalizing it from the past and the now into the future. Back to the future. Great stuff. So I think you got the point. I've been over this a few times before. So let's see if there's not a chapter soon. It looks like it. In other words, once you learn how to walk, hopefully you will never have to learn how to walk again. The scientific method is an example of deductive reasoning. 1. All valid hypotheses must be logically consistent. All valid hypotheses must conform with and predict empirical data. Yeah, and if they don't predict, well, then there's something wrong with okay. Well, I'll let it pass, right? This is the scientific method. You can read all about it online. I think there's nothing to comment on here, right? It might be, I could criticize the way it's formulated and anything. I won't do that because it's such an established principle, the scientific method, right? There are criticists, people who criticize the philosophy of science and so on. Fine. I think that the religion of science is vastly overrated, right? It's like, just say the word science and everyone is bowing down in the grovel, right? And it's completely overrated, right? It's not invalid in that sense, but it's vastly overrated what it's able to tell you. And certainly something like Sam Harris can never show you anything about morality using, inductive reasoning, right? Okay, and that's also a distinction I'm happy that Stefan Molyneux makes. That's great, and one of the reasons why he exactly tells us why his ethics doesn't work. So go back and listen to my video called Stefan Molyneux shows that his ethics is flawed. I urge you, or I recommend you doing that, right? Okay, so how far did we get? In individual hypotheses, the hypotheses are usually developed according to inductive reasoning, i.e. some pattern is observed, an apple falls from a tree, and a logical hypothesis, gravity, is proposed, which is then tested against new empirical data. Oh, yeah. The scientific method is absolute deductive, but individual hypotheses are usually, if new data contradicts the hypothesis, it must be amended. Inductive reasoning must be subject to the absolutes of deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning must be subject to the absolutes of deductive reasoning. Dependent, does it mean dependent? I mean, if you're making inductive reasoning, it was based on, I am making an experiment here, you can say. If I was going to make these, data, I was going to do this under controlled circumstances, weight and temperature and all these parameters, and I will know distances and whatever, right? I would measure that, and I will make some formula and see how does it behave over time, and also I will see, oh, that pattern look like a parabola, whatever it is, right? That's right. Where the deductive reasoning is, I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure what he means by subject to the absolutes of deductive reasoning. I don't understand what he's trying to say. Where's the inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning? But because that's what I do with this thing here, right? A roll of tape. I'm saying this tape roll is round. Let's take that, right? Every tape rolls are round. This is a tape roll, therefore it's round. That could be a valid syllogism, or syllogism or deductive reasoning, right? So do I need to do that in order to do inductive reasoning about how it behaves? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just too stupid to understand it, right? I don't think so. I don't hope so, but I'm just a little confused. Maybe I should make a little remark here. Maybe I think a little about it. Let's see if there's inductive reasoning uncertainty. Yeah, that will be problematic. I will keep that for the next time. This was just a good hour of part 3. So let's say that's it for now, and see you next